Welcome, everyone, to a brand new explainer. Today, we're embarking on a truly fascinating and deeply empathetic journey into the study of abnormal psychology as we unpack Chapter 4, Psychological Disorders. We'll be looking at what actually goes wrong when people develop these problems, the root causes behind them, and the various signs and symptoms associated with different conditions. You know, it's a topic that has intrigued and honestly mystified cultures for over 2.5 millennia. But by the end of our time today, you'll have a crystal clear understanding of the exact framework psychologists use to make sense of it all.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap so you know exactly where we're headed. We'll start with defining abnormal behavior. Then, historical views on abnormality. Third, modern psychological models. Fourth, schizophrenia and psychosis. And finally, developmental and addictive disorders.
Section 1. Defining abnormal behavior. Because to understand psychological disorders, we first have to figure out what abnormal actually means.
I want you to think about this for a second. How do you, personally, define normal? Because in psychology, it's actually incredibly tricky. We don't have a perfect, ideal model, or even a universally accepted normal baseline for human behavior to compare things against. The word abnormal literally means away from the normal, implying some kind of deviation from a standard. But society's standards, well, they shift all the time.
So to solve this, most definitions lean on a common set of features that we call the 4Ds. These are basically the pillars for identifying a psychological disorder. First up is deviance. These are behaviors that are highly unusual, extreme, or just flat-out bizarre compared to societal norms. Second is distress. This means the behavior is deeply unpleasant and upsetting, either to the person experiencing it or to the people around them. Third is dysfunction. This is when the issue actually interferes with a person's ability to carry out their daily activities. It just gets in the way of them functioning optimally. And fourth is danger. That's behavior posing a possible risk of harm, either to the individual themselves or to others.
But here's where it gets nuanced, right? Context completely dictates the diagnosis. Imagine you see someone intensely talking to themselves. Abnormal, right? Well, not if they're deep in prayer. Or what about a person standing in the middle of a busy street waving their arms wildly? That looks entirely abnormal, unless, of course, that person is a traffic policeman. This is a vital reminder that we absolutely cannot look at a behavior in isolation. We always have to consider the environment and the situation where it's happening.
Section 2. Historical views on abnormality. Let's move on and see how our understanding of this has evolved over time. If we swiftly map out the history, we see a totally fascinating evolution. Back in ancient Greece, philosopher-physicians like Hippocrates and Galen actually took a biological approach. Galen thought our temperament was governed by 4 humors, or body fluids: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. An imbalance in those fluids, that's what caused disorders. Then, in the Middle Ages, the pendulum swung wildly towards superstition and demonology. Mental illness was often blamed on evil spirits, which unfortunately led to tragic events like witch hunts. Fast forward to the modern era, and thankfully, we've discarded the demonology in favor of a sophisticated, scientific approach that looks at a mix of biological, psychological, and social factors.
Section 3. Modern Psychological Models. This is exactly how modern psychologists explain maladaptive behavior today.
Let's start with one of the oldest and most famous frameworks, Sigmund Freud's psychodynamic model. Freud theorized that abnormal behavior stems from unconscious conflicts between 3 dynamic internal forces. You've got the id, which drives our raw instinctual needs and impulses. You have the ego, which represents our rational, realistic thinking. And you have the superego, holding our moral standards. When these 3 forces violently clash beneath the surface of our conscious awareness, which Freud said is often rooted in early childhood experiences, it manifests as abnormal symptoms.
And this brilliantly illustrates another cornerstone of modern psychology, the diathesis stress model. This equation explains something super important: why 2 people can face the exact same hardship, but only one develops a disorder. Step 1 is the diathesis. That's a biological or genetic predisposition to a disorder. Step 2 means this biological aberration leaves the person vulnerable or at risk. But a disorder doesn't just automatically happen. It requires step 3, the presence of pathogenic stress. It's literally only when that biological vulnerability gets triggered by a highly stressful life situation that the psychological disorder actually develops.
Today, the most comprehensive view we use is the biopsychosocial approach. This is an interactional model that beautifully converges all these theories we've been talking about. It argues that no single factor is the sole culprit.
Instead, biological factors like genetics and neurotransmitters, psychological factors like our thoughts and emotions, and social factors like our environment and relationships, they all continuously interact to influence our mental health. It's like a giant puzzle where all the pieces matter.
Section 4. Schizophrenia and psychosis. Now we'll transition to looking at how these severe psychological disruptions manifest in reality.
We have to start with schizophrenia, which is a descriptive term for a group of highly complex psychotic disorders. This is a profoundly debilitating condition. An individual experiences a severe deterioration in their personal, social, and occupational functioning. And the social and psychological costs of schizophrenia, they are absolutely tremendous. It places an immense emotional and practical burden not just on the patients themselves, but on their families and society as a whole.
So the crucial point is understanding how this deterioration actually happens through specific symptoms. Patients often experience deeply disturbed thought processes and strange, unshared perceptions of reality. Sometimes there are motor abnormalities too, but a defining feature for many is delusions. A delusion is a firmly held false belief that has no basis in reality, and you literally cannot shake it with rational argument. Delusions of persecution are the most common in schizophrenia. This is a terrifying experience for the person. They genuinely believe they are being plotted against, spied on, or slandered, entirely without any rational grounds.
Section 5. Developmental and addictive disorders. Let's explore the disorders affecting neurodevelopment, behavior, and substance dependence. Let's look at neurodevelopmental disorders first. These usually appear early in a child's development. We have ADHD, which is characterized by deep struggles to sustain attention alongside hyperactivity and impulsivity. That makes it incredibly hard to focus on work or play. Then there's the autism spectrum, where individuals experience significant deficits in communication and social relationships. They often find it really difficult to initiate interactions or understand nonverbal cues. And we have intellectual disability, which involves below-average intellectual functioning. Typically, this means an IQ of approximately 70 or below, coupled with significant impairments in daily adaptive behaviors.
Now let's briefly touch on how the mind sometimes tries to protect itself, specifically through dissociative disorders. These involve sudden, temporary alterations of consciousness that literally blot out painful or traumatic experiences. A prime example of this is dissociative amnesia. This involves an extensive but highly selective memory loss. The person forgets the traumatic event itself, but their general knowledge and everyday skills remain perfectly intact. It's a really incredible, though difficult, defense mechanism.
And then we have the behavioral mechanics of substance-related and addictive disorders. These substances severely disrupt both biological and psychological functioning. Take cocaine, for example. It causes short-term memory and attention issues. But worse, it creates a fierce cycle of dependence. The drug completely dominates the person's life, requiring more and more usage just to get the desired effect. Meanwhile, suddenly stopping results in crushing depression and fatigue. Alcohol poses a similarly massive challenge. Its active chemical is quickly absorbed into the blood and carried directly to the central nervous system, profoundly altering brain function over time. I want to conclude our explainer today with this incredibly powerful quote from the famous analytical psychologist Carl Jung. He said, "How can I be substantial without casting a shadow? I must have a dark side too if I am to be whole, and by becoming conscious of my shadow, I remember once more that I am a human being like any other." You know, it's so vital to remember that everyone faces problems, stresses, and anxieties. We all have a shadow. Understanding psychological disorders isn't about judging the abnormal. It's really about bringing empathy, science, and structure to the sheer complexity of the human condition. So, as we wrap up Chapter 4, I'll leave you with this thought. If normalcy is just an illusion dictated by context, how might exploring your own shadow change the way you view the people around you?